Good day everyone, I am Hazel Yumul, the next discussant, and my topic for today is about the challenges of our world under Chapter 22, Challenges and Hope for the Future. So let's begin. Voices from the Past. In 1962, Rachel Carson wrote, "It is not my contention that chemical pesticides must never be used. I do contend that we have put poisons and biologically potent chemicals into the hands of persons largely or wholly ignorant of their potentials for harm. We have subjected enormous numbers of people to contact with these poisons. Without their consent and often without their knowledge, I contend furthermore that we have all allowed these chemicals to be used with little or no advanced investigation of their effect on soil, water, wildlife, and man himself. Future generations are unlikely to condone our lack of prudent concern for the integrity of the natural world that supports all life." The next is the environmental crisis. In 1962, American scientist Rachel Carson argued that the use of pesticides chemicals spray on crops to kill insects was having deadly, unforeseen results. Besides insects, birds, fish, and other wild animals were being killed by the buildup of these pesticides in the environment. Also, the pesticide residue on food was harmful to human beings. Carson's warnings alarmed many scientists and gave rise to a new field of science called ecology, the study of the relationship between living things and their environment. Many people became more aware of the dangers to the environment. Let's now proceed to the impact of population growth. Deforestation, the clearing of forests, is one byproduct of a growing population. Forests and jungles have been cut down to provide more farmland and firewood, removing the natural dwelling places for plants and animals. In 1997, fires in Indonesia raged out of control, destroying thousands of acres of rainforest that were home to many species. The fires, which have recurred in recent years, also cause intense smog. Especially worrisome is the rapid destruction of tropical rainforests near Earth's equator. Although the tropical rainforests cover only 6% of Earth's surface, they support 50% of the world's species of plants and animals. The tropical rainforests are also crucial to human survival. They remove carbon dioxide from air and return oxygen to it. Chemical waste and disasters. Another danger to the environment is chemical waste. One concern involves chlorofluorocarbons, which are gases used in aerosol cans, refrigerators, and automobile air conditioners. Many scientists warn that the release of chlorofluorocarbons is destroying the ozone layer, a thin layer of gas in the upper atmosphere that shields Earth from the sun's ultraviolet rays. Other scientists have proposed the existence of greenhouse effect, global warming caused by the buildup of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. Global warming could create various problems. Sea levels could rise because of melting polar ice, for example, and cause flooding of coastal areas. Yet another problem is acid rain, the rainfall that results when sulfur produced by factories mixes with moisture in the air. Acid rain has been held responsible for killing forests in both North America and Europe. Major ecological disasters have also occurred during the last 20 years. In 1984, a chemical plant at Bhopal, India released toxic fumes into the air, killing 3,800 people and injuring another 100,000. A nuclear explosion at Chernobyl in 1986 released radiation that killed hundreds. In 1989, the oil tanker Exxon Valdez ran around in Alaska. Thousands of birds were killed, fishing grounds were polluted, and the local environment was devastated. These ecological disasters made people more aware of the need to deal with environmental problems. In 1987, representatives of 43 nations meeting in Montreal agreed to protect Earth's ozone layer by reducing the use of chlorofluorocarbons. In 1992, An Earth Summit in Rio de Janeiro examined the challenges to the environment and proposed new solutions. Individual nations have reacted to environmental problems by enacting recycling and water conservation programs and by curbing the dumping of toxic materials. It is not yet clear whether these efforts will be enough to achieve sustainable development, economic development that does not limit the ability of future generations to meet their needs. Next is the technological revolution. In this section, you will learn how two American astronauts landed on the moon in 1969. This landing opened a new frontier of space to world exploration. Since World War II, a stunning array of changes has created a technological revolution. The first technological revolution is the transportation, communications, and space. Modern transportation and communication systems are transforming the world. Since the 1970s, jumbo jet airlines have moved millions of people around the world each year. The Internet, the world's largest computer network, provides quick access to enormous quantities of information. The development of the World Wide Web in 1990s made the Internet even more accessible. Satellites, cable television, facsimile machines, and cellular telephones allow people to communicate with each other practically everywhere on Earth. The exploration of space is another world-changing development. In 1969, the American astronauts Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin landed on the moon. Space probes and shuttle flights have increased scientific knowledge, but not without human cause. In 1986, the Space Shuttle Challenger exploded a minute or so after liftoff, killing all on board. In 2003, 7 astronauts died when the shuttle Columbia abruptly disintegrated over Texas in the last minutes of a 16-day mission. So this is the astronaut Buzz Aldrin on the moon with the Apollo 11 lunar model. Next, healthcare and agriculture. In the field of health, new medicines enable doctors to treat both physical and mental illnesses. New technologies, including computer-aided imaging, have enabled doctors to perform miracle operations. Mechanical valves and pumps for the heart as well as organ transplants have allowed people to live longer and more productive lives. Technological changes in the field of health have raised new concerns, however, and have led to a new field of study called bioethics, which deals with moral choices in medical research. For example, genetic engineering is a new scientific field that alters the genetic information of cells to produce new variations. Some scientists have questions whether genetic engineering might accidentally create new strains of deadly bacteria that could not be controlled. The issues of stem cell research and human cloning have also generated intense debate. In agriculture, the Green Revolution has promised immense returns. The Green Revolution refers to the development of new strains of rice, corn, and other grains that have greater yields. It was promoted as the technological solution to feeding the world's ever-growing population. However, immense quantities of chemical fertilizers are needed to grow the new strains, and many farmers cannot afford them. Next is weapons. The technological revolution has also led to new and frightening weapons, such as nuclear, biological, and chemical weapons. The end of the Cold War reduced the risk of a major nuclear conflict, but regional nuclear conflicts are still possible. There are also fears that terrorists will somehow obtain and use nuclear materials. Biowarfare, the use of disease and poisons against civilians and soldiers in wartime, is not new. The first known incident occurred in Europe when plague-infested corpses were launched over city walls to infect those inside. Chemical weapons were used extensively in World War I. The Japanese used biological weapons on China in the 1930s and 1940s. Governments have made agreements to limit the research, production, and use of biological and chemical weapons. In 1972, the United States and the Soviet Union agreed to permit work only a defensive biological weapons. These measures have not prevented terrorists and terrorist supporting governments from practicing bioterrorism, the use of biological and chemical weapons in terrorist attacks. For example, in 1995, members of a Japanese religious sect, Aum Shinrikyo, released a chemical agent, sarin gas, in a Tokyo subway, killing 12 people and injuring thousands. Economic and social challenges. Since World War II, the nations of the world have developed a global economy, an economy in which the production, distribution, and sale of goods take place on a worldwide scale. In 1995, the World Trade Organization was established. Trade agreements are made and upheld by its more than 140 members. The WTO has been criticized for placing commercial over environment and health interests and for leaving out small and developing countries. Still, the WTO is the only global international organization dealing with rules of trade among nations. The gap between rich and poor nations. One of the features of global economy is the wide gap between rich and poor nations. Rich nations are mainly in the Northern Hemisphere and include the United States, Canada, Western Europe, and Japan. They have well-organized industrial and education systems and use advanced technologies. Poor nations, often called developing countries, are mainly in Southern Hemisphere and include many nations in Africa, Asia, and Latin America. Developing countries are mainly farming nations with little technology. A world population of about 6 billion today is expected to reach 8.9 billion by 2050. Most growth will take place in developing nations. This explosive population growth makes it difficult for developing nations to modernize their economies. Rapidly growing populations mean that many people move to the cities to find work. Some cities have grown dramatically. Sao Paulo, Brazil, for example, had 8.1 million people in 1970, but 17.9 million in 2000. Millions live in slums or shanty towns ringing the city. Hunger has also become a staggering problem. Every year, more than 8 million people die of hunger. Civil wars have also created devastating food shortage. In Sudan's civil war in 1980s, both sides refused to allow food to be sent to their enemies. By the early 1990s, 1.3 million had died from starvation. Threats to world health. Certain diseases have raised global concerns in recent decades. The most important is AIDS, or acquired immune deficiency syndrome. AIDS is caused by the virus known as HIV, which is spread through bodily fluids. HIV weakens the immune system so people with the disease cannot fight other illnesses such as cancer. AIDS was the first reported in the United States in 1981 among gay men. Public support for research and treatment expanded when the disease spread to other groups. While no cure has been found, new drugs were developed in the late 1980s and 1990s. Taken in combination, they allow some people to slow the fatal progression of the disease. In the United States and other developed countries, education and treatment has limited AIDS spread. By 2000, about 470,000 Americans had died from the disease. In less developed countries, AIDS has claimed many more lives because people often have poor diets, unclean water, and poor health care. Prevention efforts have faced many obstacles, and almost no one can afford the costly drugs. By the end of 2002, the United Nations estimated that 42 million people worldwide were HIV positive or had AIDS. More than 29 million were in sub-Saharan Africa, while another 6 million were in South and Southeast Asia. In Africa, an estimated 12 million children have been orphaned because of AIDS. The economies of nations with high AIDS rates are severely handicapped. Countries cannot make economic progress since AIDS victims are usually the young adults who are its best workers. Without sufficient resources, many African nations have been unable to respond well to the crisis. International support has begun to help. However, in 2003, the United States committed $15 billion to treat AIDS in 12 African and 2 Caribbean nations. A second infectious disease raised a world threat in 2003, SARS, or Severe Acute Respiratory Syndrome. SARS spread much like the common cold. About 10% of people with SARS die. By late spring 2003, the World Health Organization was reporting that there had been 8,221 cases in 28 countries and that 735 people had died. Most cases were found in China. Lastly, political challenges. After World War II, African and Asian leaders identified democracy as the defining theme of their new political cultures. Within a decade, however, democratic systems in many developing countries had been replaced by military dictatorships or one-party governments. Many leaders underestimated the difficulties of building democratic political institutions. In recent years, there have been signs of renewed interest in democracy in various parts of the world, particularly in Asia, Africa, and Latin America. Examples are the free elections held in South Korea, Taiwan, and the Philippines. Similar developments have taken place in a number of African countries and throughout Latin America. Unfortunately, regional, ethnic, and religious differences continue to create conflict around the world. In Europe, Yugoslavia has been torn apart by ethnic divisions. In the Middle East, the conflict between Israelis and Palestinians continues to produce acts of terror. Conflicts among hostile ethnic groups in Africa have led to massacres of hundreds of thousands. It remains to be seen how such conflicts can be resolved. And that's all my report. Thank you for listening.